Hello everyone, welcome to PilupuTV. Today we are talking about an issue that might sound technical but has a real impact on how our voices are represented here in Virginia. So we're talking about the Virginia Redistricting Amendment. And honestly, many of us probably have seen these billboards or at least any ads on YouTube or on TV asking us to vote yes or no. It can get confusing pretty quickly. So, what does this actually mean? To help us break this down, we have Dr. Srilekha Palle with us today, a healthcare leader, policy advocate, and a community voice with over 20 years of experience. She serves as a chair of Virginia Asian Advisory Board and has actively engaged in both health and public policy, bringing unique and well-informed perspective to this discussion. Dr. Palle, thank you so much for joining us today here.
Vaidehi, thanks to you and PilupuTV for having me on the show.
Yeah, really excited to have this conversation with you, Dr. Palle. So, to get things started off for the listeners who may not be familiar with the issue, can you please briefly explain what Virginia Redistricting Amendment is and why is it on ballot now?
Absolutely, Vaidehi. What the amendment asks is asking Virginia voters whether the state constitution should be changed so that the General Assembly can temporarily adapt a new congressional map for upcoming elections. So to keep it simple, we just went through this process not that long ago, in 2025. So for those of us that are probably familiar with politics or just kind of getting into the tune of it, when we went through this process in 2025, we as voters went into the polls to tell our people whether to accept this proposal of redistricting or not. And the majority, which is over 60% of the people, said, yes, let's go ahead and do this redistricting effort. So after that, a commission was actually formed to do this redistricting. However, the commission was very independent, bipartisan commission, but the commission itself could not come to consensus on how the maps and redistricting has to happen. So it actually went to Supreme Court after that, and Supreme Court held a court hearing and had an independent body draw these maps for us. And in spite of this, here we are a few years later going through the same process again. So according to the ballot language, it surely says a temporary change because we still need to go through this process after 2030 census. As many of your audience will already know, we do this census every 10 years. But the reason it is on the ballot now is that supporters argue that the country is an unusual political climate. When they say unusual political climate, they're talking about war and the inflation that's going on and redistricting occurring in other states. But people that don't agree with it, there are always two sides to the story, right? Wonder why we need to do it now. If it is happening across the country, why in Virginia? So here we are. It's going to be back on the ballot again.
Okay. Okay. So, just to understand what it means, like, as I said, as part of my intro, we keep seeing these billboards everywhere. And, the minute I open my YouTube, I just get these series of ads asking me to either vote yes or no. But I just want to understand from a voter perspective, what exactly would, change in if I vote yes. So what happens if this amendment passes?
Yeah. So again, even though I agree or disagree, I'll try to stay as bipartisan and nonpartisan so our viewers understand both sides of it. Let's say when you say I support it, basically you're saying, Virginia, go and say yes, and we will do this process one more time. If you go and to the voting booth and say no, You're basically saying Virginia Supreme Court has already decided. We people talked about it in the past years. And so go ahead and say no, because this is not necessary in Virginia. So that's what supporting means. That's what opposing means. Supporting means go say yes. Opposing means no, right? So what happens whether you say yes or no? Currently, we have 11 congressional states in Virginia. Seven of them are Democrats and four of them are Republicans. So if this bill passes or this amendment passes, then there is a very good chance that it becomes 10 Democrat seats and one Republican seat. And that Republican seat will be somewhere near Southwest Virginia, where near that Kentucky, West Virginia, North Carolina, Southwest Virginia border. Rest of everything will become Democrats, right? Because the way redistricting is planned is to kind of favor one party over the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does totally make sense. Got it. So, we are going to redistribute the districts, uh, which also defines, uh, which also defines the party that they support or elected, I would rather say, right?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So since you explained what yes is, we obviously can draw from it what no means. But from the beginning of our conversation, I noticed that you said this is going to be a temporary change. And from what I've read, this is a temporary change till 2030 census. So is that right? Like, I know that you mentioned that we do it every 10 years, but, we've been doing this we've done this in 2025 and redoing it in 2026. But now that we, just get this done, we do not have a permission or a chance to change it till 2030?
We won't, right, after this, because again, you very well stated it. The census happens once in 10 years. So the reason the political parties are framing this as temporary is very important for us as voters to understand. Supporters want voters to see this as an emergency response to current national development, not a full rejection of the bipartisan redistricting we did it in 2020. I'm sorry, it was not 2025, it was in 2020, right? Because the
Okay.
way supporters, if they want yes to win, they're just basically emphasizing on the point that this is just temporary voters. Don't to give too much into it. It's just because there is so much going on in national level. We are doing this as an emergency response because the Republicans are trying to do it in Indiana, Florida, Texas, and Democrats are trying to do it in California. So we are just going to do it to kind of off balance them, right? But
Got it.
what opponents would say, because again, there is always two sides to the story. What opponents are saying is that their concern is that once you establish a precedent for suspending or bypassing a voter approved reform, because this was approved by all of us. We went to the polls, 60% of us or 67% of us said that, yes, go ahead and go through the Virginia redistricting process. And they formed a bipartisan committee. They couldn't come to a consensus. So it went to Virginia Supreme Court and they made sure the maps were fair and square. So what opponents are saying is that for every national emergency, Virginia will suspend all of this process that actually happened legally and fairly. Then politicians will continue to do everything again and again. In other words, even if the amendment is written as temporary, critiques fear the broader lesson could be permanent, right? The map drawing rules can visit. So now you're in power, Vaidehi, you want to do it your way. And then we all have to go, as voters, we all have to go. Shri comes into power and she wants her way. So then now voters have to go. So this establishes a precedent. And that is what opponents are afraid of.
Yeah, so that kind of leads me into my next question. Yes, you're right. Some critics say that this could give politicians more control over drawing districts again. But how valid is that concern?
I think they frame this as a very defensive move. Again, I can't say how valid it is, but I also would. I am somebody that I'm through and through Constitution, right? I believe in voter power. I feel like if voters have gone to the polls and said this is how it has to be, then we have to let the coursework go through that. So fairness again, Vaidehi, I feel it's not just about what Virginia does in isolation, right? It's how about how Virginia fits into national contest over this representation. That's what supporters are saying it. Supporters say that when one side manipulates maps elsewhere, like they feel like Democrats are the supporters here and opposing are Republicans. What Democrats are saying that when one side manipulate maps elsewhere in Florida and Texas, we need to respond, and they present this amendment again as temporary. And this argument actually could be persuasive to people who believe state level redistricting cannot be separated from the national political consequences, right? So that there are people that would say, hey, we belong to United States. We are one of the state. If something is happening at national level, we got to change. Whereas the strongest version is that Virginia is not initiating this crisis, but reacting to the voter approved process. So it's like there are always both sides. So supporters, Democrats are like, we have to react. Whereas Republicans are like, why are we reacting? We already did what we did. So how many times are we going to react to the changes that are happening at national level?
Got it. I definitely, I mean, thank you so much. The way that you described it, it totally makes voting yes or no. Definitely, it's not just a binary question. That vote of the voter actually redefines a lot of things, not just at their state level, but at a national level for the midterm elections that is supposed to happen by the end of the year, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, why the competitive districts are very important. And I will tell you, even though I belong to one political party, I've always been on the belief, and I think this is important for our voters to understand, saying that either it is a school board or supervisor elections or delegate or mayoral election, it's always beneficial for us as common man to have both parties. It can never be equally divided. If you look at the national platform, it's not like one party is getting 35% and the other party is getting 65, right? We are fairly equally 51, 49, 51.2, 49.8. And that is actually very healthy, right? Because then you can have a healthy debate. You don't want to go into congressional or any Senate and US representatives feel like one party is has such big majority, they start bullying other party. So I'm somebody that believes that it can never be 50-50, but it's good to have that balance. So what this will do is when you support and say yes, Democrats will probably hold 10 congressional seats and Republicans will hold one congressional seat. I would have opposed it even if it is the other way around. If it was one Democrat, and because that's not healthy for democracy, right? Because then the party that is in power and that has all these 10 districts are not going to be technically representing the entire population. And also one key factor is, and when people may wonder, why do we even do this maps, right? Because
Yeah.
they force the candidates to appeal more broadly rather than just to their base. Tell you just example about Fairfax County. Now, in Fairfax County, we are basically 34%, 35% Republicans, and the rest of 65% is Democrats, right?
Mhm.
Democrats never have to really run an aggressive race to win because there is always going to be 65% people that are voting for them, which means that they probably will never, I wouldn't say will never, that's a very wrong statement, but don't have the urge to work super hard for you and me. They're anyway going to win, right? Whereas
Right.
Republicans, since they're 35%, they know they're never going to win Northern Virginia. So they don't even try. So we kind of lose on both ends. And that's why I
Oh,
say you have to have that 5-6, 6-5, 4-7 in order to make sure the political candidates are more feeling more accountable, and the things that they do reflect the electorate like us, because most of if you think about immigrant population, most of us are pretty independent. We can go either way, right? We are not
right.
extreme on other side, but nobody will appeal to us in this case, because one party always wins, the other party is like, we are never going to win, so why even try?
Right. I mean, that's such a great point, Srilekha. Like, one party does not have to try at all, and the other party, like, no matter what they do, they still know the results. So they would not put their effort. So we actually, rather than the political parties there, it is, I think, the voters that are losing in this regard.
Yeah. And that's exactly how I feel. That's why I think the proposed amendment is not correcting an injustice inside Virginia, but it is rather using out of state developments as a reason to reopen a system that was functioning as intended, right? So we just really, again, if you remember, 2.7 million Virginians, or roughly about 65.7% of voters, already approved the reform. So why change now? I mean, again, voters demand fairness, transparency, and insulation from self-interested political actors. Right now, Democrats are in the gubernatorial seats, governor. So now they are doing this. What if next time Republicans come in, then they're going to do their things, right? So as voters, we just really have to be careful and say we should follow the Constitution and not political parties. When it comes to these kind of things, really have to independently think and say, I really shouldn't go by what politicians are saying. I need to look at Constitution. What does Constitution say? Constitution says you got to do this process fairly, transparently, which happen, and needs to do that because census change every 10 years. The last time I presented my Virginia Asian Advisory Report to Governor Youngkin, then Governor Youngkin, I showed them the demographics of how much Asian American population increased in the past 10 years. So the population changes so dramatically. So it's reasonable to do it every 10 years, but doing it because you are in power is probably not a great idea. And it's not good for either. I mean, they're doing that in Florida. Republicans are pushing for that in Florida and Texas. And I don't think that's the right thing to do there as well.
Right. So I want to also know about the other states that you said that this process is happening. But before we go there, I mean, through your answer that you mentioned fairness, right? So how do we actually define fairness when it comes to drawing these congressional districts? And a follow-up on that is, like, I think you already answered this, but in pieces, but I just want to us to just put it all together. So I'm just asking again, do you think this amendment is truly about fairness or more about political advantage?
I mean, I would think it is more about political advantage. Definitely, it's not about fairness. If it is a fair process, I would say you should just stick to what Constitution told us to, which means that you draw the maps every 10 years, right? But for everyday voters, Vaidehi, let me explain you. The biggest consequence is that district lines shape the political power. So they determine which communities are grouped together, which candidates are most likely to win, how competitive elections are, how closely congressional outcomes reflect the preferences of voters. So it's not like you go say yes or no. You just really have to think it through and say, oh boy, this is going to be a big time determining factor, right? Let's say if the amendment passes and a new map is used. Let's just
Mhm.
think that way. Virginians like you and me may find ourselves in different districts. Like, for example, where I live currently in Fairfax, I used to be part of 10th Congressional District. Right now, for the past few years, 3 years, I've been part of 11th Congressional District. When there is already so hard for us to remember who is our delegate, who is our supervisor,
Right.
who is our congressional, who is our senators. I mean, I could bet, and this happens to all of us. So it's not to point out your voters. It happens to me, even after being in the inner circle of politics. Sometimes I forget who my senator is because it felt like it just changed 2 years back, right? Not the state
Right.
senator, my district senator, I completely forget. So for regular voters, let's say they want representation and they have to have a question, they develop a rapport with one office, and then only to realize in 2 years that office is no longer valuable for our visa processes and stuff. Now you have to go to a different congressional office, right? And that's precisely that tenure is. There's a rhyme or reason of why Constitution does it in certain way, and I always have been a big believer that follow the process, follow the Constitution. That was what was written by our founding fathers, and you can't go wrong.
Right. And, when they usually come up with these policies, like on a broader perspective, like, doing this every 10 years, they mostly might have based it out on the previous stats, previous data. It's just not like a random number that they came up with.
Yeah. And by the way, one important point I do want to make here, though, because I always want to say you have to, I'm a big believer saying that put yourself in other people's shoe and try to understand. If the people that are saying supporting, if they were saying that, hey, something happened in Virginia and the demographics quickly changed, right? Let's say
Hmm.
we were never one of those federal contracting state, and all of a sudden federal contractors came in here, and then we had an influx of population of 1 million people in the past 2 years. Does it make sense? Maybe it could, because all of a sudden now the completely demographics have changed, so there should be an equal representation and stuff. However, the reason they want to do is because of national struggle over democratic rules, right? So,
Mhm.
so I feel like I see their point. They are, but supporters of this amendment, they're explicitly connecting Virginia's situation to national developments in state, where they believe maps are being redrawn. But then, as a Virginian, it raises a difficult question, saying that should one state stick to the ideal process if others are not, is what Democrats are saying. Why are we the only one following the rules? We don't have to when every other state is not following. Whereas what
Right.
opponents say is, I'm sure you or your voters may have understood the word gerrymandering. What they say is the solution for all of this can be because there is gerrymandering happening elsewhere. Is not to do it at home, right? Supporters say that saying fairness cannot be one side. You got to
Right.
you have to respond if there is a change in Virginia, not necessarily national rules.
Right. Yeah. So since you brought up the word, so some people argue that both the parties engage in gerrymandering when they have power. What is your take on that?
I think they're absolutely right. I mean, that's why it is happening in Texas and Florida by Republicans, which I think should not be happening, but they're doing it. And now Democrats are doing it in California because they have advantage over it. President Trump wasn't very happy with Indiana, state of Indiana, because Indiana is a pure red state, but they really want to push off Democrats, even if there are few Democrats there. So they're trying to do there. So I think that is the sad part. It's like national politicians and national politics are dictating in some states. So now you have Gavin Newsom from California and President Obama coming to Virginia and saying that, but they are doing it. Let's go ahead and do it here too. But I have to tell you, when Governor Abigail was not a governor and she was a congressional candidate, or she was a congresswoman, there are explicit videos multiple times where she said gerrymandering is not okay, it's against our constitution, we should not do it, and we should not encourage. So the question would be, what changed in 80 days of you being in power? What changed is we have Governor Gavin Newsom putting the pressure, we have President Obama putting the pressure and saying that, hey, it is happening elsewhere. Republicans are doing it in other states, so let's go ahead and take advantage of it and go ahead and do it in Virginia, which means that in US House of Representatives, the scoring will change dramatically. In Senate House, the scoring will change dramatically, so it can go very bad. So for independent voters like you and me, it's not a great, because they're not doing it for you or my benefit. They're doing
Right.
it for political reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally makes sense. Dr. Palle, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to let the viewers know before they make the right decision on their voting?
The first thing I think, if they're tuning into this podcast itself, I would say that we are civically engaged, and I have to appreciate anyone that actually got through the podcast up until this point, right? Because in this day and age, I feel like immigrants, as immigrants, like you and me as Americans, we have to be politically engaged. I mean, every single day when I say politically engaged, doesn't mean that we have to hold the flag and go and rally by any means, right? But we all have to be responsible. Whether you support or you oppose, you have to see the pros and cons of everything. So if they've come in this far, first thing I want to thank and appreciate them. But from housekeeping perspective, the early voting already has started. The early voting started about a couple of weeks back. So if you go to Sully Government Center or Fairfax Government Center, every single day people are going and voting, but the last day would be April 21st. So I would recommend, whether you support or oppose, take the time to get out and do it. That way, at least you won't come back and feel regretful that you didn't contribute to that. On the same token, I do want to thank even Pilupu TV, because when a lot of these podcasts are very focused on glamour and glitz, which I think is totally fine too. It's always nice for them to even engage, put this kind of conversation, because at the end of the day, our kids and grandkids are going to be in this beautiful country. And no matter what steps we take or we don't to take, will impact the younger generation to no, to a big extent than we even realize on a daily basis.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Palle. Thank you so much for helping us understand this important issue from multiple perspectives. We really appreciate your time and insights. And to all the Pilpu TV viewers, thank you so much for listening. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. Do like, share, and subscribe to Pilpu TV.